Business Now. Stephen Carroll's here. Stephen, good morning to you.
Hi, Rochelle.
We start here in France. Good news for the new government concerning unemployment.
The unemployment rate has fallen to its lowest level in 5 years. It dropped to 9.3% in mainland France in the first 3 months of this year. That's down 0.4 percentage points. Youth unemployment fell by 1.5 points to just under 22%. Now, including France's overseas territories, where joblessness is traditionally higher, the rate was 9.6%. That's also a 5-year low. That's the evolution of the unemployment rate that we've seen there since the start of 2012 until that figure. You can see it reaching back below the levels we'd seen in the middle of 2012. Well, those figures are now the responsibility of a new team of ministers. The new Labour minister has spent much of her career as a senior executive in some of France's biggest companies. Muriel Pénicaud will now be charged with the delicate task of reforming France's strict labour law.
Right, well, Stephen, it can't all be good news. It's another rough day on the markets as investors turn sour, let's say, on Donald Trump.
After what we call the Trump bump after the elections, we're now looking at the Trump slump on the markets, triggered by the latest scandal surrounding the president. The US dollar has now given up all of its gains since the elections last year, while Wall Street had its worst day in 8 months on Wednesday. Brian Quinn has more.
The honeymoon is over. On Wednesday, US stock markets underwent their most intense sell-off since Donald Trump's election. Behind the slide, reports that Trump had tried to end the FBI's investigation into former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn's ties to Russia.
If these headlines are true, there is clearly some concern about power in the Oval Office and how that's going to affect anything moving forward at this point.
The Dow Jones Industrial Average and the S&P 500 shedding nearly 2% each, with the Nasdaq losing over 2.5%. Recent gains in the value of the US dollar against an assortment of key foreign currencies were wiped out, with the dollar falling to its lowest level since November 4th. US equities markets have been on a tear since Trump's election, with the Dow and the S&P hitting record highs as recently as last week. The so-called Trump trade, with investors betting on planned tax cuts and deregulation from the new administration to stimulate the economy and boost inflation, could be getting a harsh dose of political reality.
A significant part of what's produced a 6-month market rally is the notion that we're going to have radical deregulation, particularly but not exclusively around financial issues, and we're going to have massive tax cuts, particularly but not exclusively for large companies. The weaker the president is, the less likely you are to get those tax cuts, and some of those premiums start coming out of the market.
The Trump administration has said the U.S. stock market would serve as its economic report card, and despite the slide, markets remain significantly higher than before the election. But as investigations continue, its grades could drop even further.
Well, let's check in on how the markets are trading today. In Europe, shares in the red again, falls across London, Paris and Frankfurt. London seeing the biggest gains, but we had seen larger falls on the European markets in trading yesterday, the continental European markets, I should say. So London's perhaps catching up today. Over in Asia, the sell-off had continued as well over Donald Trump and concerns about his administration. The Nikkei in Tokyo finishing the day down over 1%. Some more of the day's business headlines for you now. Japan's economic growth picked up in the first 3 months of the year. The world's third largest economy grew by 2.2% on an annualised basis. That's almost double the rate of the previous quarter. Japan's economy is now on its longest growth streak in more than a decade, but there are warnings of a slowdown to come later in the year. The American tech giant Cisco is cutting another 1,100 jobs as it tries to cut costs. That's on top of more than 5,000 job losses announced last year. Cisco's shares fell in after-hours trading after the company said that it's expecting a sharper drop in sales for the current quarter. And shares in the Chinese internet giant Tencent rose to a record high in Hong Kong after its latest results. Profits of the company rose by almost 60% in the 3 months to the end of March. Revenues jumped by more than half as well to more than €6.4 billion.
All right, Stephen, and finally from you, think of what $3 billion could buy you.
I could think of a lot of things, and I bet you could as well. And it definitely would not be a car park in Hong Kong. A 5-storey parking building in the centre of the city has been sold for that hefty price tag, which is a record total and a record per square metre. The building covers almost 2,900 square metres and was bought by the local developer Henderson Land. Now, it's the first property to go on sale in the central district of Hong Kong since the territory was handed back to China in 1997. The demand is being driven by sky-high office rents in the city. They're 75% higher than in New York. I still don't see how that makes a car park worth $3 billion, though.
Neither do I. Exorbitant prices there, $3 billion. Stephen, thank you very much for the business roundup.